Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members and officers. Welcome to the Planning Committee. In the interest of safety, if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Due to the ice rink, please assemble in King Henry I Street, which is the cul-de-sac which runs towards the gun wharf. In order to comply with the Portsmouth Cultural Trust Fire Marshal regulations, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. For those of you who have not attended this committee before, I will explain the running order for this afternoon. After committee members have declared their interests and agreed the minutes of the previous meeting, I will announce each item and ask those of you who are here to make a deputation to come and sit at the table. After the planning officer has made the presentation for the application, individual deputies will have 6 minutes to express their views, and joint deputies will have 12 minutes between them to make their views known. After which, you will take no further part in the proceedings unless we need to ask a question to clarify a statement that has been made. Members will then ask questions, make comments, and a decision on the application will be made. Both members of the committee and members of the public are reminded of the need to consider material planning matters and not to refer to any personal information about other members of the public. Let that sink in. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed, filmed from a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting room, and that the recording will be on the Council's website. The camera will mainly capture the backs of those making deputations, but there will be some footage of those making deputations as they approach and leave the table, where microphones are located, and of people entering or leaving the room while the meeting is in progress. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting, on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. May I ask everyone to use the microphones provided when they are speaking. You turn them on by the button on the right-hand side, and that turns them on and off. You know they're on because of a red light. Before we go any further, I think it would be useful for members of the public if the people here introduce themselves. I am Hugh Mason, a councillor for St Jude Ward in Southsea, and I am the chairman.
My name is Kieran Laven, and I'm the planning solicitor.
Joanne Moore-Smith, Democratic Services.
David Penrose, Democratic Services.
Judith Smythe, St Jude Ward, Vice Chair of this committee.
Councillor Steve Pitt, Central Southsea Ward.
Councillor Lynn Stagg, Baffins Ward.
Susie Horton, Central Southsea Ward.
Luke Stubbs, Eastern Caryswater Ward.
Gemma New, Paulsgrove Ward.
Councillor Donna Jones, Hilsey Ward.
Alan Banting, Team Leader Planning.
Alison Pinkney, Planning Officer.
Stephen Flynn, Highways.
Claire Upton Brown, Head of Planning.
Thank you very much. First item on the agenda, do we have any apologies?
I've heard from Councillor Hooper and from Councillor Udy, who both sent their apologies.
Councillor Donna Jones.
I will need to leave at 2:30 if we're not finished by then. I've got another meeting at 3 o'clock in Fareham.
Other members of the committee, yes. Any other comments or apologies? No, right. Declarations of members' interests. Do members have any interests to declare? Councillor Stubbs.
Application number 2 for a shelter on the seafront in Eastney. This was driven by a residents group of which I was a member. I consider this to be a prejudicial interest, and therefore I shall leave the room for that part of the meeting.
Thank you for informing us. Councillor Donna Jones.
Yeah, I've got First one is in item 1. One of the the deputation from Mr. Sparks is a solicitor I know from the Magistrates Court, but it's non-prejudicial. It's a professional capacity. I know him. In item 2, Leon Rees, I think we all know, so that goes without saying. And then the Lakeside one, previously in my capacity as leader of the council, I did meet with the owners of Lakeside on several occasions to talk about the 4 or 5 different parcels of land surrounding it, but again, it's completely non-prejudicial because I've got no financial gain myself.
Thank you. Were we to leave because of our knowledge of Mr. Leon Rees, I think that the whole committee would collapse. Councillor Smythe.
I was about to say that I've attended a lot of meetings run by Leon Rees, and but you've just said that doesn't count, so...
Councillor Purton.
Similar, and also the fact that as the cabinet member I have had interactions with Leon about this application, but have given him no indication either way as to how I feel about it, merely that it should progress to this committee, so I don't have a prejudice.
Okay, thank you very much. No others. We move to the minutes of the meeting of the 14th of November, which you have on pages 5 to 10. I will take them for accuracy. Page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9. Thank you. Are there any matters which arising from those minutes which you would wish to bring to our attention? Thank you. Can we move then to updates on previous planning applications? Mrs. Upson-Brown.
Thank you. I have no updates this afternoon for the committee.
I would bring to members' attention the fact that there have been a number of planning appeal decisions in the last couple of days that have been reported, and you will find them amongst your emails. They make instructive reading, I fear. Can we then move to the first planning application, which is for 65 Marmion Road, and I would ask Mr. Sparks to come to the table, please. May I have the officer's report on this one?
Good afternoon, councillors. This application concerns the residential redevelopment of a site on the northern side of Marmion Road within Owen Southsea Conservation Area and an area at risk of flooding. The southern half of the site also lies within the boundaries of the Southsea Town Centre. This aerial view demonstrates the extent of the site and the predominantly residential nature of its surroundings. The site is currently vacant but was last used at ground level by a fastenings and hardware business with workshops to the rear and a retail counter at the front. The upper floors were used as a maisonette. So we have properties, there's 5 properties that are in Marmion Avenue that back onto the site. We have 2 locally listed buildings to the rear, the development of Eves Mews to the west, and then this is Marmion Road. The existing shop front is defined as secondary frontage within the town centre, where a more flexible approach to uses can be adopted, although residential use at ground floor is discouraged. This photograph shows the single-storey retail element at the front here, the original semi-detached 3-storey building here, and it also serves to show the piered gateways at the adjacent plots with their vehicular accesses. These floor plans are of the existing building. You'll see there's almost 100% site coverage with the commercial workshops and the retail element at the front, and this is the original semi-detached part. The application essentially seeks to create 2 residential units within the site by removing all the extensions and workshops to the front, rear and sides of the original semi-detached building, converting and extending number 65, which will be referred to as unit number 1, into a 5-bed house, and constructing a 1-bed single-storey dwelling to the rear of the site. So this is what would essentially become unit 1, which will be a 5-bed semi-detached property with parking to the front, and then this is the footprint of the proposed single-storey 1-bed unit at the rear. Unit 1 at the front would benefit from a single-storey extension to the rear, a dormer to the side serving a bathroom within the roof slope, and a new vehicular access onto Marmion Road with a forecourt accommodating 2 cars. The entrance would also allow for pedestrian access to Unit 2 at the rear. The scheme would not provide any on-site parking for Unit 2, given the site constraints and the accessible town centre location. This is the proposed floor plans of the 2nd floor and 1st floor of the semi-detached unit, and the roof plan of the single-storey dwelling to the rear. The front of the building would undergo significant change, with the removal of the single-storey retail extension, the reinstatement of the ground floor bay window and timber sliding sash windows to both the ground and the 1st floor bays, the reinstatement of some pilaster details that are at the front of the property, and the creation of a paved forecourt with landscaping and a piered entrance similar to those adjacent to the east. The benefits that will be achieved to the appearance of this property and its setting within the wider conservation area are considered significant and sufficient to outweigh policy SDC2 that discourages residential use of the ground floor, and also the highway safety concerns regarding the lack of suitable visibility displays by reason of the new piers and the walling that will be constructed. Unit 2 at the rear, in order to address the flood risk of the site, its finished floor level will be increased from that existing at 3.79 metres AOD to 4.6 AOD, which is an 81 centimetre increase. This would result in a building exceeding the height of the existing workshop, which has a shallow curved roof, by 300 millimetres. That's excluding the proposed lantern roof light. However, because of the flat roof design of the proposed Unit 2, this would result in the building height at its boundaries being increased by 700 millimetres on the eastern side and 1.1 metres on the western. So this is a 700 millimetre increase that would be experienced on this side, and on the west side, because of the additional height of this part will be 1.1 metres higher than the existing workshop that extends down to here. As set out within the report, given the intervening distances, orientation of the existing proposed buildings and existing fenestration within surrounding properties, it's not considered likely that Unit 2 would significantly adversely affect the residential amenities of those occupying surrounding buildings to the north, west and south. And whilst this contemporary design approach would contrast with the more traditional style of the surrounding development, it's considered to preserve the character and appearance of this conservation area. We'll now talk in detail about the impact on the properties to the east in Marmion Avenue. This is the current outlook from these properties, and so this is the existing workshop here. The development there you'll see is the Eaves Mews existing behind it. The main impact would be felt by the occupiers of the properties to the east within Marmion Avenue. These properties have limited rear garden depths of approximately 6.4 to 6.6 metres and are only separated from the site by a very narrow passageway. Unit 2 would be most visible from the rear ground floor rooms and garden area of properties 1 to 5 Marmion Avenue, but most readily from numbers 3 and 4 Marmion Avenue, as it would be directly in front of these dwellings. The outlooks from 1 and 2 Marmion Avenue is likely to be improved with an increased sense of space because of the removal of the workshops. So this plan here demonstrates with the red line, dotted line or dashed line, the existing outbuilding workshop, and then this is Unit 2. So this element would be 300 mil above the existing workshop height, although obviously because it's a flat roof design on the eastern and western side of the boundaries we have an increase in height. This is an aerial shot showing numbers 1 to 5 Marmion Avenue, and this is the workshop and this one that will be removed, and the unit 2 would come approximately in that position there. So the outlook from these properties is likely to be improved somewhat, but units 3 and 4 will have unit 2 directly in front of them. From within number 3 Marmion Avenue, looking out onto again, this is again from number 3, looking slightly to the south, and this is from the garden area. And this is a photograph taken from the first floor of the north-facing window within the existing number 65. So the properties that we're looking at now are these along here, and that's their limited rear garden areas. There's an alleyway that comes off Marmion Avenue and up there, serving the rear of these properties. Whilst Unit 2 would undoubtedly be more readily visible above the existing boundary treatment of the Marmion Avenue properties, it would still be a single-storey building, and the proximity, bulk and height of Unit 2 and its proposed boundary treatment are not considered excessive or to result in an unduly adverse impact upon the available light, outlook or sense of space experienced by the occupiers of these neighbouring properties. For context, this is the passageway to the east of the site that has been raised within a number of representations received. The existing workshop has a doorway leading into this passageway. The proposed plans show this replaced slightly in a more northerly position by a gate from the garden area of Unit 2. Questions have been raised as to the legitimacy of the use of this passageway by the application site. However, this is beyond the remit of the planning application, as acceptability of the scheme is not dependent on this gateway. On balance, the proposal is considered acceptable, subject to the recommended conditions and the SPA contribution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Sparks, you have 6 minutes to make a case.
Thank you very much. There are really 2 issues that we take in relation... Oh, sorry. My apologies. There are really 2 issues that I take, and indeed the neighbours along Marmion Avenue take, with the presentation presented to you by the planning officer. Can I first of all, in relation to the first, ask you to consider, if you have before you, the conservation area documentation in relation to Owen Southsea. That was a document set out in, I think it was 1990s, to deal with a number of difficulties which were being witnessed in relation to development within the Owens conservation area. And it's an interesting document because it's something I know that you will take account of, and within that document it seems to suggest this in terms of the purposes, because I think what's being suggested is that this is a out of sight, out of mind development which has limited impact on the street scenescape, and therefore it can be passed through as not having an impact on the conservation area. But the purposes of that guideline says this: to safeguard the completeness, the more marginal parts of this area in particular must now have the benefit of careful control and enhancement. And so although the proposed Unit 2, and I make it clear the observations I make are concerning Unit 2, could properly be to be marginal in terms of the overall street scene, it seems to me that the guidelines completely say that when you're considering it, you have to apply the same rules to something that's marginal as opposed to up front. If further guidance were required in relation to that point, you can see within the body of those guidelines the suggestion that street scene is different. There is a suggestion that there are certain views from certain houses which are important. And the impact, indeed, in relation to the street scene that we have between a vacant plot and a plot as proposed with Unit 2 is going to be significant. The guidelines, of course, say that the Council will actively discourage the introduction of inappropriate building materials which are inappropriate to the area. That's guideline number 1. Guideline number 9 says that where development is acceptable, development briefs will be prepared to ensure that development is in character with that of a conservation area. This is an area where there are no other single-storey, flat-roofed residents. There are no other single-storey, flat-roof residents which are proposed to be clad. And so in relation to it, it seems to me, and our deputation is, that it is significantly outside of the guidelines within the conservation area documentation, and the Council should therefore have very grave cause for concern to allow a development of this nature, bearing in mind its location. The second point relates again to the PSC 23 within the local Portsmouth plan, and essentially it is what has been said in all representations in terms of protecting the amenity and the good standard of living of neighbours. Now, in effect, the people who would be most impacted by the proposal of Unit 2 is my property, Unit number 3, Marmion Avenue, number 4 and number 5. Having said that, neighbours here from 1 and 2 also support this deputation, and so I would ask you to bear that in mind. The increase in height, as you've seen in relation to the squared off wall, is some 700 millimetres. To put that in context, at the moment the height of the current building in terms of a differential between the fence line and, I'm grateful, and the gutter line is about 500 millimetres. So that in itself is more than doubling the brick wall which will be in front of us. The addition of the skylight increases that to about 1.5 metres. Sadly, we do not live in the Caribbean. Light does not come directly down, and the impact of this additional element to Unit 2, together with the increased height, it means that there will be a significant loss of light to my property, to property number 4, and indeed to property number 5. It is something which will cause an enormous shadow within our properties. We will be faced with a blank wall some 6.5, 7 metres from our back door, and whilst the current unit is an eyesore, that is not, in my submission, a reason for it to be replaced by something which so interferes with our amenity and good standard of living. The loss of light issue, of course, is something that can be dealt with in a different venue. There are already discussions taking place in relation to a court case concerning a right to light and injunctive proceedings. That's not a matter for this council meeting, I understand that, but the fact that those discussions are taking place should indicate, I hope, the difficulties that we face, but also the aspects of the loss of light which is going to occur. Are my 6 minutes up? Nearly.
Since we're only 3 items this afternoon, I can be a little Chair.
Well, I'm almost finished, Chair. So, in conclusion, the overall height, the skylights, the increased feeling of enclosure that it will represent to those properties in Marmion Avenue in terms of the terrace that I live in, is such that I would ask you to agree with this deputation and say that, as well as the issues I've mentioned in terms of the conservation area, that there is such an impact in terms of our standard of living that it should be rejected in terms of Unit 2. Can I thank you for your time?
Thank you very much, Mr. Sparks. Members, questions of the officers. Councillor Stubbs.
Just to clarify one point coming out of the deputation, which relates to the cladding, and there's reference in the report to cedar cladding, and the deputy made points about that not being in keeping with the area. I'd like to give you opportunity to comment on that.
Yes, vertical cedar cladding isn't typical within the area, and as I've expressed in my report, it would be a contrast to the more traditional architectural styles within the area and use of materials. But it, whilst being contrast, it's not considered to be harmful, and given the modest nature of the building, is considered to sit and be respective to the conservation area.
Councillor Stagg.
Thank you. Has the amount of shadow cast by the second unit been examined? The effect on the avenue behind the gentleman's house? Because I don't know how high is the maximum height of the second unit?
So the measurement from the lowest part of the footpath up to that point measures off at 3.5 metres, and then to the top of the lantern, which is slightly lower than the tallest part of that, is 4.1 metres.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So has the effect of the shadow, because particularly in winter time, because the sun is very low in the sky, in winter time, what would be the effect? Has that been measured?
There hasn't been a specific technical measurement undertaken on the site, but it's been the site has been visited, number 3, and the view that has been taken by officers is that relationship would be affected, but wouldn't be harmful and significant enough to justify refusal.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much. We've had the right of light legislation mentioned today, and whilst I appreciate that Mr Sparks acknowledged that it's not necessarily material planning consideration for us today, can you just clarify if you're aware if the applicant has conducted a right of light survey, and if they have, is that relevant for us to take that into consideration or not?
It hasn't been brought to my attention that they have undertaken a survey. It hasn't been submitted. I have no information.
Is there anything else about the legislation that we should be mindful of today?
So I think in terms of your considerations this afternoon as a planning committee, it is actually that relationship and that impact, and whether or not you feel that the increase in height, which is shown quite clearly on that very helpful plan with the red line as well as the proposals superimposed, whether that increase in height would result in such a loss of light or increased sense of enclosure as to make that development unacceptable to you, or whether, you know, given the amount that it would increase by, you feel
I appreciate
that
the impact on the adjoining property. I was specifically asking about the legislation because it is separate than the material considerations that are listed down here that are relevant. I'm trying to find out whether or not there is any weight we should be putting on the right of light legislation. Whilst I appreciate it's not a material planning consideration, are there any other elements that I'm unaware of that we should be thinking of?
It's not a material consideration.
Okay.
Councillor Stubbs.
The report makes a number of points from highways about highway safety and vehicles backing out on the length of the wall and so forth, and I appreciate the points made in the report then about the visuals of, you know, effectively not having a stretch of wall. Can you confirm that the highway access is not atypical for the existing properties on the street, and it's not, you know, it would only be, it might not match the recommended modern standard, but it would still be compatible with what's already the norm?
Yes, Councillor, as you can see from this photograph, it does only show the two adjacent to the right, but the further east you go, there are probably 4 or 5 other typical accesses. Some indeed have solid gates to them as well, so certainly the piers that you see there are very typical of that area, and having an entrance directly onto the back edge of the footpath is also extremely typical of properties to the east of this site.
Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of if Unit 2 was not in the proposal, I understand that no one has any particular objections to Unit 1 or the things around it at all. So, in order to try and work out exactly where we are in terms of a position, if the plans for Unit 1 progressed and all of the sheds at the back were demolished, could somebody build anything in that space that would not need planning permission? And if they could, how high could they go without needing planning permission? What I don't want us to do as a committee is make a daft decision that somebody ends up building an outbuilding there using PD that is basically the same as a residential dwelling. If we're going to turn down a residential dwelling, which we desperately need in the city, then we need to know that what we're not going to end up with is something that's almost identical, but nobody's ever going to live in.
Under Class E, I'm just checking if there's any restriction for Article 2.3. Then, essentially, if they were with, if the proposed outbuilding was set within further away than 2 metres from the boundary, then they could go up to 4 metres with a dual pitch roof. If they wanted to be closer than 2 metres to the boundary, they could only go up to 2.5 metres. And if they had a flat roof, the height of a building, 2.8. I haven't got 2.8, I've got 3 metres in any other case. So essentially you're looking at 4 metres with a dual pitch roof would be your maximum height.
So for clarity then, if it was to go to what I understand it currently does, which is the boundary of the existing site, what is the difference between the PD right and the proposal in front of us in terms of height?
It could only have an eve height of 2.5 metres and a total height with a dual pitch of 4 metres.
So just for clarification, what is the height difference between that and what's in front of us today?
The total height, the highest part taking the lantern would be 4.1 metres, so that's 0.1 of a metre.
So are you saying we're arguing about 10 centimetres?
Yes.
Can I add that at the moment there isn't a dwelling house on that site, so as a committee you could grant planning permission for Unit 1. If Unit 2 didn't form part of this application, you could remove permitted development rights. So be mindful of when you're doing that comparison that there is a judgment there around whether there is a strong case for removing PD rights to do outbuildings if you are granting permission for a house in the first instance.
Okay, for clarification then, Chair, how extraordinary would such a decision be for this committee?
In terms of
removing the PD rights?
Well, I think you'd have to bear in mind what you've got there already and the reasonableness of imposing a planning condition that takes away effectively the ability to put a structure which isn't dissimilar to something that's all there already. So that would be your judgment.
Then Councillor Smythe.
Removing PD rights. I mean, I've been knocking around on planning committees for nearly 12 years now, and that's quite that's a newish one on me in terms of being able to do that at this committee at this juncture. So therefore, the question is really, if we did consider doing that today, what do you think the chances are of this council losing that at appeal and therefore being fined? Because if we think it could stand up, I think it's something that maybe we should consider.
If we go back to the application we've got in front of us, we haven't got an application to just create Unit 1. So in terms of decision making this afternoon, you've got a scheme that is 2 units. So we are talking hypothetically. Hypothetically, if you had an application in front of you for 1 unit, then I think you would be making that judgment in terms of what is the planning reason for the condition and whether or not that reason would be reasonable. So you'd have reason, sorry, that sounded a bit reasonable, would be reasonable, but so you'd have to look at it in the context of normally you could extend, put an ancillary building up. It's conservation area. Is there something about putting that building up that would have a negative effect on the conservation area? But you would have to put it in the context you've already got a building there, and therefore that already forms part of the character of the conservation area. I hope that helped.
This is a sort of supplementary question to Councillor Pitt and Councillor Jones' question. Is it often that we remove PD rights? I know in conservation areas it's actually quite common, but do we do it often here?
So in terms of you've got to have a reason to remove permitted development rights, because all you're doing is you're not stopping a development happening, you're just saying that development then requires planning permission. So the sort of situations where you might remove permitted development rights is maybe in a situation where maybe on a new development where you've got a garage and you don't want the garage to turn into living accommodation because you lose a parking space, I think is quite a common one. Or there's a relationship issue that if you put an extension up, that relationship between an adjoining property would be so damaging. So the removal of permitted development rights is more common on new residential schemes rather than the sort of situation we're dealing with this afternoon. I think in the situation this afternoon, you've got to use what you've got on the ground at the moment as your baseline to make your assessment against. So I think it would be unusual to get to a point where you're stopping buildings happening if they're already there, but there may be circumstances where, because of the character of the conservation area or maybe proximity to listed buildings, you choose to bring that control back to the council in terms of assessing the impact of a proposal that could otherwise happen without planning permission.
Whilst my colleagues are thinking of other questions, page 11, I note that the finished floor level is at 4.6 AOD, whereas the road level of Marmion Road, which certainly in my time, the city, I've never known to flood, is at 2.8 metres AOD. Was this matter of the increase of the height discussed with members of the planning authority prior to the submission of these plans? And if so, and indeed if not, what are their comments upon the appropriateness of a 1.8 metre floor level above the road level?
During the course of considering the application and any pre-app, discussion has been undertaken with the Environment Agency and the Eastern Solent Coastal Partnership. It would be, there is no, if in the event of flooding, they would have to remain in the building as a place of refuge until emergency planning could be implemented to retrieve them, or until the waters died down. But that is the idea, that it would be of such a level that the actual unit would be safe enough for somebody to stay in.
So what you're suggesting is telling me is that this meets the recommendations of the Environment Agency and is not could not be considered excessive.
The Environment Agency are happy with the level, and they requested a condition be placed on any approval. They have obviously pointed out that they would any residents would have to stay in the unit in the event of a flood, and then I think I've listed all the emergency flood plans that the council has to then put in place to retrieve people who are in areas of safe refuge.
Any other questions from members? Comments? Comments. Councillor Smythe.
Notwithstanding the discussion we've had about permitted development and so forth, I do think that this is an application that is likely to be very contentious and could lead to a dangerous precedent. I do welcome the 5-bed house. I think it'll be a vast improvement on CP fastenings. It's a lovely, lovely house, and one would imagine that somebody living in a 5-bed house that's not going to be that cheap would welcome a bit more garden than this development allows them to have. One of the characteristics of Owen's Southsea is that it is about houses set in the landscape, and I see this as overdevelopment. I see this as actually asking somebody to live in an outhouse in the garden, and that's a precedent we just simply don't want. And particularly if we're going in for sort of cladding and things rather than making it look like a coach house of a bigger house or something grander. I think it is, I would absolutely agree with Mr. Sparks about this seeming like a hidden away development that is not going to affect people or the setting of the house just because we can't see it from Marmion Road. I mean, I think the 5-bed house looks very good and deserves a decent garden. I think that it's overdevelopment. I think there will be deprivation of light to gardens in Marmion Avenue, and as a gardener myself in a fairly constrained area, the loss of any light means you have to change the things you've got in pots and that sort of thing. And I think it would give a precedent of a development in backland. There are quite a lot of these kind of situations in Owen's Southsea, the heart of my ward, as you know, which where people could apply to do the same. In fact, from canvassing, I know of a few disgraceful places which were not designed and probably don't have planning application as dwellings, where people are living in effect in sheds in the back garden. And I don't see this as that much different, frankly. It'll have planning permission if we give it, but it's still going to be substantially substandard accommodation. It's quite small, it's going to be quite dark, it only has a single aspect, it has a flat roof which isn't in character but also will be a maintenance headache for somebody in 15-20 years time, and I think is substandard. I feel quite strongly that we shouldn't be cramming the city with such developments, and we'll be under more pressure to do that if house prices go up as they are doing in this area. And I think we should very much stick to the spirit behind the Owen's Southsea plans, which was about a very attractive Victorian suburb in which there are gardens and trees and so on and so forth. I've been quite appalled when I've gone around canvassing and found some of these sheds in which some people have been living. I mean, really seriously shocked, and I don't think that this is a great improvement on some of that. So I will definitely be voting against giving it planning permission. And I would like to see a statement about permitted development put in. I mean, this is a very unusual circumstance to have a whole plot built over, and I can't believe that it would be unreasonable to put a condition in about permitted development. I mean, a small garden shed, yes, you'd expect a big house like that to have one, but that certainly isn't the same as the scale of development that's there at the moment.
Are you therefore proposing that the application be rejected?
Yes, Chair, I'd like to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Stubbs.
I'm going to take a different angle on this. I mean, so there is already an existing building there which covers the large part of the site, and I think we have to be mindful about the options which are open to the owner of the building. So the retail unit could be converted as it is without any structural changes into one or potentially two flats without even requiring planning consent. And the outbuildings at the back, while some form of planning would be needed to repurpose a building from a commercial use into a residential one in a residential area, will be something which, if an application for that came in, then the planning case for it will be very strong, will be very difficult to resist. So it will be quite possible to take the structure that is there and convert it into far more than two properties, many more than that. And that will be something which planning policy locally and more to the point nationally would support. So I think you have to assess the applications from that starting point, and there's a lot of positives on this. The building, the shop unit is removed, which very much tidies up the appearance of it all, and we're talking here about a conservation area. I do take the point that the conservation area isn't just about the principal highway frontage, but that is the most important part nonetheless, and it would tidy that up considerably. It would introduce an element of garden space, and while I you know, I understand. I mean, I sympathise with where Councillor Snive is coming from, but we don't. There are no circumstances under which this council can somehow tell people to demolish the existing buildings and make them into gardens. They can choose to do that, but if they don't choose to do it, then there's no way we could ever make anyone do that through planning. As to the Unit 2, I mean, I share some of the concerns about the additional height. The tricky thing is, of course, it's a one-storey building, and the reason for the additional height is because agencies of central government are concerned about the flooding impact, and you know, we can't reasonably say, well, you should redesign it in such a way as to disregard the opinion of those agencies. And I think that, as I said, that if the applicant chooses to pursue this path and have a building to the rear, then something will be permitted. So I'm going to propose the application. I think that this overall is a positive application, which, while it has some disbenefits, certainly has more benefits. And from that basis, I'm happy to see it go ahead. So I'm happy to propose it. Conscious of the debate we've already had, I'm also happy, if members so wish and if I have support in this, to include an amendment about removing permitted development rights, which I think is justifiable in the sense that you've got 2 garden plots there, and if we have without permitted development, then you can have 50% of that in turn can be taken for an extension at some point in the future. So I think that it is reasonable to do that if that's what members wish.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you very much. Well, just to complicate things, I'm going to add a third option in that I'm going to propose today, but I'm going to start with my general comments and then conclude with my proposal. First of all, thank goodness we have a tighter, more strict and robust planning regime now than obviously happened maybe back in the 60s or whenever this took place, because, you know, whoever gave the permission previously had little regard for the Owen Southsea Conservation Area, and for a site to be built from boundary to boundary, front to back, is pretty much unheard of, particularly in our city, which is so densely populated. I mean, what is there at the moment is particularly poor, and in particular the workshop at the back, which is not doing anything to enhance the conservation area at the moment, albeit it's obviously there and it's got its permission. I think page 3 of the report, the first page, actually is quite useful when it says the summary of the main issues. I'm just going to quickly comment on them. So the first one that we're directed to give consideration to is whether the loss of the retail and workshop uses in this location are acceptable in principle. So for me, that would be a yes. Whether the creation of 2 residential units within the site are acceptable in principle, including flood risk. Now, not necessarily how they're laid out, but it could be 2 flats, for example. You know, the principle of 2 dwellings, because it's a large site, I don't have an issue with. Whether the design of the proposed extension is appropriate, conundrum number 1. Whether the proposal would preserve or enhance the character or appearance of the Owen Southsea Conservation Area, conundrum number 2. The likely impact on the residential amenity of those occupying nearby residential properties. That for me is probably the biggest conundrum, the biggest issue there is. Highway parking implications, no issue at all. An impact on the Solent Special Protection Area, SPA. I have no issue at all with that one. I was going to say something slightly rude, but I won't do. Anyway, so I think that the loss of the shop, you know, unfortunately, the way that the world is now with online shopping as such, you know, these kind of units will sit empty for many, many months, and if not years, if we don't do something with them. So I think that actually, if I was living in the property number next door, which I assume is number 3, and that wall was coming down, I would be delighted with the front portion of this application. And for me, this application really is in 2 parts. You've got the front section, which Mr. Sparks said I think, I don't know, put words in his mouth, he had no issue with, and I think that will greatly enhance the street scene, the neighbouring properties, and will make number 1 itself look, is it number 1? It's number 65, sorry. It will make his property, sorry, is round the corner, Marmion Avenue, sorry. So Marmion Road, so 65, and if that's 63 or 67, whichever one is next door, I think it will greatly enhance the view for that particular property, and will definitely make the road look a lot better, and actually back to originally how it originally was intended, which is part of conservation work as well. So from that perspective, I like it a lot. I think the garden space in the rear that Councillor Stubbs has just mentioned is a really key point. because this is an application of two parts, one bit that's actually quite, very, very good, very, very strong, and one bit that does create some concerns around shoehorning in of a site, rather than a yes for something that we don't feel is quite right, or an absolute no, which is kind of end of the road, applicant has to start again from scratch, and it creates significant delays. I'd like to put forward a deferral based on two things. One, that there could then be a consideration to remove the proposal for the single dwelling at the rear. Now that may, you have to advise me on this, if they remove that section of the planning application that's currently in, it may trigger a whole new application. It may be that that bit can just come out. If that can, for that to be considered. Or two, to redesign the roof on the, I think it would be the eastern boundary. Could you go to the picture for me, please, of the, when you showed the heights? I think it was your last image. That one. So where the red line is on this side, if that roof went down, it would mean moving the light well over a bit as well, I suppose. But that would then significantly reduce the impact on 1, 3 and 5 Marmion Road, and certainly the property that's directly, number 3, I think, is directly adjacent to it. But whether or not the applicant, rather than resetting the clock, if they get a rejection today, that might give them an opportunity to just tweak the design slightly to mitigate that down. And the reason I say this is because if we refuse this today, I am honestly very concerned about appeal, because I do think that it needs to be quite cast iron nowadays, the refusals, for them not to go through on appeal. And I think if we had some time to just try and work with the applicant, not making them reset the clock, not making them start all over again, but just listening to what's been said today, maybe it wouldn't be hipping the roof, but bringing that roof in a little bit, it might, that could just be the final push that's needed to get this over the line. But if it could be on that basis, the deferral to consider either complete removal or adjusting the roof line, I think that it is quite bold. You can see the wall, the boundary wall that's there at the moment, so even the that will be quite a big increase from what's there at the moment. So I think it will have an impact, and the gardens aren't very large, so I can imagine that with the cupola, the thing on the top, it will have an impact on those neighbouring properties. I don't think it's necessarily a material planning one that would stand up to appeal, but if we're trying to have good quality homes for people in Portsmouth, then I think it's something we should certainly consider.
Thank you. We have had 3 proposals. Can I, Councillor Pitt?
Just before we hone down on those 3 proposals any further, Chair, but well, no, don't worry. That would be laughable. If, with your indulgence, there's 2 things that have been said, one by Councillor Stubbs and one by Councillor Jones, that I think are really interesting, and I'd just like to confirm where we are with officers, if that's okay. The first was Councillor Stubbs saying that we wouldn't be able to stop them converting the existing shop, and in the report it talks about reducing it from 77% as it is now, but the rest of the explanation on that paragraph is clear as mud to me. It's currently recorded, it says recorded at the bottom of page 10, recorded at 77.9% in April 2017. One, that's quite a while ago, and there's been other things happening around that area. Has there been any impact on that figure? And if it drops below 75, then my understanding is they couldn't just convert the shop, but those figures of 23.6 and 19.9 don't seem to bear directly on 77.9. Could we have some clarification on whether or not they could convert the old CP fastening shop as it currently stands without planning permission?
The 75% is to do with the primary frontage. The secondary figures there you have, that's to do with the actual secondary figures. I don't have the figures for 2018, I'm afraid.
I think the question though is it permitted development to change, to go from retail to residential?
Yes, it is the question.
Yes. So we're just going to check that, and I don't know the answer off my head, which is why I've bounced it back to the office.
Somebody said earlier that the policy was against doing that.
But it's whether it's permitted development or not, in which case the policy doesn't come into play. So if you just bear with...
Because I think, to clarify, Councillor Stubbs is right. The worst of all worlds will be that we turn this down and then they end up building a shed in the back garden where the workshops are, which then comes back to us to convert into a single dwelling, which is distinctly possible since it's only 0.1 of a metre difference, and that we end up with the shop front remaining and converted into an HMO.
Follow on that actually, which it's going through at the moment. The government are looking at bringing in industry to residential permitted development, so arguably that could encompass the buildings to the rear.
Yeah. The reason for that particular question, while they're having a look, to move things on, was question 2. Councillor Jones's suggestion about altering that elevation in order to make it have less impact on the neighbouring gardens would seem very sensible, especially since it looks like there might be enough room to move the roof light over slightly. However, if it was adjusted downwards, is there a reason why the wall on that boundary is of that height? And could it be lowered and gain planning permission? So is the floor height between the bit where the tables and chairs are sat and the current height at that level because it needs to be, or is there an opportunity to adjust it? Because I'm minded to second Councillor Jones's proposal, but I don't want to do that if it means that we're suggesting they might amend something they actually can't amend. Yeah.
Okay. And again, I don't think I'm in a position to redesign the building in front of your eyes. But I suspect the only constraint is going to be around head height, and looking at just visually making a judgment on that height. It would look to me as if there's enough room to actually lower the ceiling height and still retain the required head height to comply with building regs.
Accepting the fact that that's an opinion, which is fine. Subject to the answer to the other question, I may be prepared to second Councillor Jones's proposal.
I have provisionally Councillor Jones's proposal for deferral. Sorry. Councillor Jones's proposal for deferral is provisionally seconded by Councillor Pitt. Is anybody minded to second either of the other two proposals we have had? In which case, so that we can give a fair run to it, I will, from the chair, second Councillor Smythe's proposal, so that we can consider rejection. Quite clearly, the committee is not entirely satisfied with this as a good proposal, and the question, therefore, is what we need to do about it. Now, two possibilities do seem to me to be either that we reject this and take the consequences, or that we go with Councillor Jones's proposal for deferral in the hope that we can work with the developer to achieve an outcome which will be more acceptable to the amenity of the residents of Marmion Avenue. Okay, as an officer, has any comment?
Hello. We've looked through the GPDO. We can't find where you've got a mixed use of the maisonette, the residential, the retail, and the sort of industrial element, where you could go use the uses, change the uses to residential. So it would need a formal planning application. Yeah.
Chair.
Councillor Smythe, Councillor Pitt.
Just to help a little bit, Chair, with the impasse we seem to be moving towards, I would be happy with Councillor Jones's suggestion as long as the option of removing the property at the back is clearly part of the discussions. And second of all, whether or not as far as I can remember our planning law, we can't approve a half planning application, can we? But as long as we could absolutely guarantee that there would be a proper discussion about having about the precedent and about the conservation area in South Sea implications, and about really what a very unattractive little property that is, I could live with that amendment. But I wouldn't want it to be limited to just improving the roof line, because I think the precedent of developing kind of basically enlarged sheds for people to live in the bottom of people's back gardens, whether there's PD or not, is not a good one for the future.
Councillor Pitt.
Just in the interest of standing up for the little guy, and in this case a little house, when you get to my age you start to think about maybe downsizing at some point, and if my other half should finally get fed up with me and decide that I need to be living on my own, then I would absolutely love to live somewhere like that. I don't accept that it's a horrible little shed at the end of somebody's garden. Whether it's appropriate for the area and the impact it has on the amenity of others is an entirely separate discussion. But I lived in a flat that was smaller than that and was very happy there.
I'm glad I don't have to consider living with you, Councillor Pitt.
Well, no, but quite a few of the residents do live in little places like that and seem very happy there. But anyway, I'm slightly concerned that we've had officer advice, but that neither the head of planning nor either of the planning officers were thoroughly secure in that decision as far as we know. They think they're reasonably confident, but I think we might benefit from Councillor Jones's proposal for a deferral, so that we absolutely know 100% for sure that that is the position. We don't want to leave ourselves open to something that was challenged because of the way it was discussed in the committee.
If I can just come back briefly on that, we have now, it does say that in Article 2.3 land, which is the conservation area, they can't benefit from these rights, so that is clear.
So at least they couldn't just convert it into, no, okay, that's fine. I still think there's a lot of merit in Councillor Jones's proposal, and in others' desires to try and see if we can get some mitigation around this. I'm not opposed to the principle of 2 dwellings on the site. I don't think it is necessarily an over-intensification, but I do think the potential impact on the visual amenity of the residents does need to be considered, and therefore a deferral was appropriate.
2 reasons for the deferral. 1, to consider removing the dwelling completely, and 2, for the applicant, it balls in their court then, and secondly, to consider it's not hipping it, is it? But you know, redesigning,
partial redesign,
whatever side
of
the eastern side or whichever elevation it is.
Right. I think, given what I have just heard, it is probably sensible to take Councillor Jones's proposal for deferral first, see whether that has general approval, since it has been seconded. Well, the sounds of Smiles has been seconded as well, but given the tenor of discussion, I think it is probably quickest and sensiblest to take Councillor Jones's first, and I intend to do that. Those in favour of Councillor Jones's proposal, sorry, Councillor Smythe.
That creates a difficulty for me, because I would prefer to have my motion first, then I will fall back and support the other motion.
Okay, right, okay, that is true.
Chair, just a question of procedure. Isn't it the motion that's been proposed and seconded first that gets voted on first?
We're suspending debate next time. Then our motion will still be on the floor. We come back, it can be considered then.
Yes. Councillor Pitt, I believe you are right. It is also, however, the point which has been made to me by the legal officer, that if it is deferred, your proposal stands and can be fully considered when we reconsider this matter at a future meeting. You will not have to fight your way through the red tape again.
Thank you, Chair, that's fine.
Okay, so can I put Councillor Jones's proposal to the committee? Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. Those abstaining, please show. That is carried NEMCON. Thank you very much. We now move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is Eastney Esplanade. Would Mr. Drake and Mr. Rees please come to the table? Thank you. May we please have the officer's report?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. This application relates to land at Eastney Beach, highlighted in red. The site adjoins the esplanade to the rear of, or to the east of Eastney Coffee Cup and to the east of the junction with St George's Road. The site is located within the defined seafront area and also within the Eastney Barracks conservation area. The site has an area of approximately 70 metres squared. The proposal is for the installation of a seafront shelter on land adjacent to Eastney Esplanade. The shelter would be constructed atop a concrete plinth measuring 0.3 metres in height, 16 metres in width and 9.2 metres in depth, creating a level access with the Esplanade. This image just shows the application site looking north. The development would be located to the west of an existing track which provides access via a ramp on the Esplanade for disabled users onto the beach. Again, this is just another image of the application site looking south. The concrete plinth, again, as I said, would be drawn level with the Esplanade to create a level access. The seafront shelter is an Edwardian style structure. It was constructed in 1925 and subsequently dismantled and removed from the western side of the Esplanade to make way for the Pyramid Centre. The images below show the existing shelter just south of the rock gardens and also the proposed shelter in storage. The proposed seafront shelter would measure 11.3 metres in width, 6.1 metres in depth and 3.4 metres in height, and it would be constructed from cast iron decorative pillars and fascia. You would have a decorative timber panel system with polycarbonate sheets below. It would essentially mimic the existing seafront shelter which is at the rock gardens. The proposed development in itself is considered to be of a suitable scale and traditional appearance. It is considered that the shelter would complement the existing seafront street furniture and also enhance the character and appearance of the Eastney Barracks conservation area. The proposal would result in the loss of an area of Eastney Beach measuring approximately 70 metres squared. In response raised by the county ecologist, an ecological management plan has been submitted for consideration. This would involve essentially 5 zones measuring 5 by 10 metres each that would be managed over the period of 5 years. This would involve clearing the existing vegetation which has been acknowledged to be poor in quality, and then this area of the beach would be reseeded with the promotion of more notable species. This would provide an opportunity for ecological enhancement on the site, but also an opportunity for education for local residents of the city as well. In light of this, the proposed development would not be considered to have an adverse impact on the ecological value of the application site, and therefore the recommendation is for conditional permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Drake, you have 6 minutes to make your point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Rodney Drake. I'm a resident in Teapot Road. I apologise. I thought I had. I've lived in Portsmouth since 1983, over 35 years. This is my first time at this planning forum. In that time I've seen many changes, some good planning decisions, some not so. The main change over this period is the increase in the number of people living on Portsea Island. Houses have been built wherever and whenever vacant land becomes available. Student accommodation and associated masses of non-council paying students has mushroomed. My view is that the city is now overfull and additional development will be detrimental to the city's future and future residents. I moved into Teapot Row at Eastney with my family in 1996 and over the years have enjoyed overlooking the Eastney Beach and its associated conservation protected status. During this period my wife and I, plus our neighbours, have noticed a massive increase in the use of the beach, especially in the summer months and especially the number of students, many being very responsible but many not, leaving litter as well as barbecue foil tins and rubbish on the beach. I note that there is now a monthly litter cleaning event planned as part of the area, which was published in the last edition of the flagship magazine. This increase in usage has brought with it consequences for the beach's flora and fauna, and in some areas damage. This has been especially true in the immediate vicinity of the Coffee Cup Cafe since it was built, a dreadful blot on the landscape in my view, and as far as I can see only benefiting the pockets of the owners of the establishment. The proposal for the new shelter being discussed here today to the east of the Coffee Cup will encroach yet further on the beach and conservation area. I see also from the plans that it is not a replacement for the original shelter, which was previously stood on the promenade near to the proposed position, but it is of a different design and it is intended to sit on the beach. I and many other residents of Teapot Row oppose this development in the strongest possible terms. It will bring with it and attract homeless people, as many of the other shelters on the seafront do. It will become a urinal for passers-by who just don't care, and it will end up smelling of urine, and judging by the other shelters on the beach require constant and expensive maintenance associated costs for the council. I note that the shelter of a similar design, as mentioned by the planning officer earlier, is being proposed for this site, and the one that's adjacent to the rock gardens is in a very poor and shabby state, rusty, poor condition, bits of the glass or the PVC broken out, and this is at the end of the summer, not after a winter experience. I have pictures of the current shelter which are less attractive than the ones that were shown by the planning officer. It's awful. It is time to retain some peace and quiet in the city, and the Eastney Beach is one such area. There are many people using the Eastney Promenade who do not want more commercialism and the associated noise and antisocial behaviour that comes with it. They just want to go for a quiet walk and enjoy the peacefulness that the Eastney Beach provides. I see from the associated studies that provision has been made for planting flora and fauna should the shelter be approved. My view is that despite this, and looking at what's happened as a result of the Coffee Cup development, the area around the shelter will suffer just because it is there. And as happens with the area of the Coffee Cup, it's become quite a shabby part of the beach now. Surely enough is enough, and we owe it to the future generations to keep the Eastney Beach status quo. No more development should be allowed at all to the east of the Coffee Cup Cafe, and if that blot on the landscape could be removed at some point in the future, I'd be a happy resident. So in closing, I object in the strongest possible terms to this proposal to install the shelter and request that it is not approved by this meeting, and that absolutely no further development is allowed on the Eastney Beach in the future, and that its protected and conservation status is respected by everybody and upheld to the enjoyment of everybody ad infinitum. I'm not sure what the role of the South Parade Trust is and how far it extends from South Parade Pier or that area. I think enough is enough. Please do not approve this application. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Mr. Rees.
Thank you, Chairman. This proposal is very much a community proposal. It's been some years in the making because we're volunteers, and it started when the old shelter, which is completely different to this shelter, was demolished because of concrete cancer. At the time, the later Lord Mayor Terry Jones, is that right? Terry Hall, proposed, and so did Lib Dem councillor Peter Eddis, that a council-owned shelter currently lying out and rusting should be used to replace the very popular previous shelter. This was supported by members from the other side. We have, in fact, a donation of £100 from the former Culture and Leisure Cabinet member Lee Hunt, and Luke Stubbs, who was later Deputy Leader of the Council, was one of dozens of local residents who put on old clothes and carried tons of old pieces of iron, rusty old iron, to a place of safe storage. This has been mentioned many times at the East South Sea Neighbourhood Forum, of which I'm chairman, and it has received the overwhelming support. I can't remember anybody in the forum speaking against it. I noticed that no other members of Teapot Row or anywhere else have objected to this scheme other than Mr. Drake, which I'm really sad about, because I think Mr. Drake has the wrong picture of this. This is a very elegant building. It's perfectly in keeping with the beautiful lampposts, and I love the beach as much as you do, Mr. Drake. I think it's glorious. The planting that is proposed, yes, I know,
It's dreadful.
it needs to be tarted up, as ours will be in immaculate condition when it goes up. The proposal for planting is in line with the proposals of the County Environmental Officer to remove impacted grass and poor quality plants and replant the beautiful native plants that inhabit the beach. There are various points raised by the seafront manager, and I point out that when this is finished by the volunteers and our sponsors, this will go back into council ownership. We will cooperate fully with the council, so if there's any question of moving it a bit further away from the path, how the roof looks, what colour it's painted, any questions of that sort, we will cooperate entirely with the seafront manager. I recall that the seafront manager has been to this site with us alongside the lady next to the chairman, who's the head of planning, and the former Culture and Leisure Cabinet member Linda Symes, and they agreed it was a good site. In fact, it's really needed. This shelter is really needed. I've pushed my wife's aunt up and down the promenade in a wheelchair. Once you've gone past the seafront cafe, there is nowhere for a mile and a half, if it starts raining, if you're walking. It's very simple. It's something that is really necessary. I don't see why it would be used as a urinal. It is a glass, basically a transparent building. Anybody who wants to go to the loo can go to the loo anywhere. They could do it there, they could do it on the beach. Why they would choose that, I don't know. It's different to the previous shelter, which was enclosed and offered some privacy. This is a community project, Chairman, and it really is to the benefit of the seafront. It looks elegant. It will provide a very necessary amenity for people caught by the weather. It will be designed and put up. The whole thing will be completely refurbished. It will look really good, and it will be done in cooperation with the council and serve all of the people of the city. I mean, where do people go, for instance, if they drive down from the north of the city to bring their kids to the beach and it starts raining? Where do they go now? They have to go and buy a coffee or go home. Where do people from outside of the city go if they drive down and walk along the beach? They either have to go back to their car or go and buy coffee or go home. This will provide something very necessary. It's beautiful. I was walking along the prom the other day and I noticed right by where we proposed to put this shelter a bus full of people in wheelchairs from a charity in Havant, I think, had stopped and was unloading its people. And I said to them, how would you feel about a shelter in this location and they thought it would be fantastic, and that's why we want to put it next to the handicapped, the wheelchair access path. That's basically it, ladies and gentlemen. It's a community project. Dozens of local people have been involved. Everybody that I've ever heard of has supported this until today. I wish Mr. Drake would reconsider, please.
No.
It will be good for the city.
You've raised, am I allowed to speak now, or is that not?
No, you have had your 6 minutes, sir.
That's fine. Thank you.
It will be good for the city, and finally I would simply like to say I wish to thank the county ecologist and the Portsmouth City Council planning officer for the considerable advice and help we've received in putting this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Rees.
Thank you.
Members, questions? Councillor Horton.
I think I might know the answer to this, but I'm just checking. I'm presuming it's on the beach because the prom is not big enough. Yes. And I presume that other areas of the prom have been considered, and that's why it's on the beach.
It is correct that it is going to be on the beach. As part of considering this application, there wasn't a wider study of where best it would be accommodated, but I think Mr. Rees has worked extensively on this project, and I believe that that is in the best location.
A follow-up question on that from the Chair. We are at the present in the final stages of beginning to plan our sea defences. How will the changes in the sea defences, which are proposed, affect this site?
Okay, essentially, so we weren't in a position to delay determination of the application on the basis of the coastal defences coming forward, but when the coastal defences is planned out and drawn up, they will have to consider that as part of the frontage.
So it will be, what if we were to accept the proposal this afternoon, it would then have to be a constraint on what could be done on the sea defences at that point.
Perhaps Claire can provide some clarity.
It's just further on from the line of the defences, so it wouldn't be something that the coastal defences would then have to plan around.
I don't know whether Claire or Niall can offer any clarity on this. You'll see in the Seafront Manager's report that there is a tiny bit of concern around the current disabled access, because since the work on the application started, as part of some funding that was put in by the last administration around disabled beach access, we've put in a different disabled access further down as a council, because it's a different form of matting than what was there before. So rather than take up the existing matting, put something down that was new and it not work, which would have removed all disabled access to the beach. The stability of the beach at the further down has enabled us to put in some trial matting there. So I also understand that the proposal, because of the money that is available, is that leaves sufficient funding. So if that is successful, and it's going through its assessments at the moment, we've got to get the disability user groups down there to make sure that they're happy with it. If all that happens, the intention is to renew this disabled access as well, but by the very nature of that around beach stability, you have to put it where your tests tell you the beach is most stable. Is there any flexibility in this around tiny movements of this development site, or once that red line is drawn, does it have to stay? Because Leon's already indicated that he's happy to work with the seafront team, so if that was an issue, is there anything we could add in as a condition or an ability designated or delegated authority to the head of planning to say that should it need to move 50 centimetres westwards or eastwards, that's not going to interfere with its ability to go ahead? Because what we don't want to do is set that red line in the sand, that, or literally in the shingle, that might mean that we lose the ability to renew that disabled beach access. That, for me as the Cabinet member, is of something that's a great interest, even though it's not something that maybe is going to affect my decision on the planning side of things.
So the existing red line does abut that disabled access. I don't believe, and maybe Claire can clarify, but I don't believe once planning permission is granted that red line can be amended. Essentially, planning permission is granted for land within that red line. As Mr. Rees has pointed out, it will come back into PCC ownership and management, and the seafront manager has indicated that there is plans to redo that disabled access, and I think that can be managed internally potentially.
Yeah, and just to confirm, legally, once your red line's fixed, it's fixed, so we couldn't expand the red line, so it would then have to be the subject of a fresh application.
So for clarity then, does the red line, is that concrete plinth completely filling right up to the edge of that red line, or is it within it?
It is within the red line, but yeah, it goes right to the edge of the red line, yeah.
Okay, when you say it's within it, so are we talking that it's on it or 20 centimetres inside it or whatever?
The plinth is within the red line.
Okay, so there is a tiny bit of flexibility there anyway. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Stagg.
Thank you. The seafront manager also expresses a bit of concern about drainage, draining away rainwater and a soakaway. Is that going to be addressed?
Again, this will be subject to building control approval, and that is something that they would deal with to ensure there is appropriate drainage.
A further one from the Chair. This particular site, am I correct in thinking that the way in which the vegetation is developing on this site at the moment, it would be a totally grassed area rather than with some of the plants which are there now within probably a decade?
So the ecological management plan is subject to approval, but Mr. Rees has produced it already, but essentially it would be managed over 5 years. As far as I understand from the ecologist's comments, this isn't the most desirable vegetation down there, so essentially it would be dug up, and better species would be replanted in that area. But whether or not it's purely seagrasses or different types of vegetation you find down there, that will be confirmed through a discharge of conditions application.
Since this would be a major change, certainly in that area to the east of the disabled access, would that require planning permission of itself to change the vegetation, deliberately change the vegetation there?
I don't believe so, no.
Comments from any member? Councillor Stagg.
I would suggest we approve it.
You're proposing the officer's recommendation?
Yes.
Is that seconded? It is seconded by Councillor Smythe. Does any member wish to speak to this matter? Councillor Horton.
Just briefly, just on the thing about the shelter, I appreciate all the reasons that were put forward for having it, but for me personally, it's not just about needing a shelter. I think that if there was another design of shelter that was coming forward for being dotted along the seafront, we might not, or I might not have embraced it so much. So I actually think it's a really nice community project. That location for me ideally would not be on the prom, but for all the reasons that it's given, I think it will be a really nice addition to the seafront. The antisocial behaviour stuff, I think, is a little bit of a red herring. I think if we didn't approve everything that possibly could be the location for antisocial behaviour, we'd have a challenge on our hands. So I am happy to approve this.
Of course, this questionable social behaviour goes back a long way. Those of us who've been on this committee a long time may remember former Councillor Hunt describing canoodling in that at great length at a previous meeting. Are there any other comments from members? It has been proposed and seconded that we accept the planning application. Those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. Gentlemen, both for your presentations. Will somebody find Councillor Stubbs?
Chair?
Yes?
Just before he manages to exit the room quietly, I understand that this is Niall's last planning committee with us, as he's about to go travelling. So could we please place on the record our gratitude for his service to the Planning Department, Portsmouth City Council, and the able way he supported the work of this committee, and wish him all the best.
Thank you very much. I think that there is hearty concurrence with that. We wish you well, and may you enjoy your travelling. The real question is whether he will come back. Okay. Members, I must say I was rather surprised at the vehemence of the objection to that. Never mind. He made his points. We now come to the third application before us this afternoon, the land at the Lakeside Business Park in Weston Road, a building for a car dealership, and the principal issue is whether this will contribute to sustainable development, whether it's in accordance with local planning policy, and whether it is suitable for an area which is designated an employment site for office development. So can we first of all have the officer's report?
Thank you, Chair. So it's a 1.62 hectare site. It's south of the main access road into Lakeside. Lakeside is accessed by the A27 Western Road dual carriageway linking Portsbridge roundabout with junction 12 of the M27. A few images of the site for you at the top. That's viewed southwards from Lakeside Road North. Bottom left shows there's quite significant changes of ground level between the carriageway and the site itself, and in between is this sort of raised planted embankment, and then a ditch, a drainage ditch running around the north and east sides of the site. The area yellow on the image there is a site of importance for nature conservation that I'll refer to as a sink. And the area shown crosshatch in purple is a secondary support area, high tide roost, under the Solent Waders and Brent Geese strategy, known as Site P138. This is an extract, a map that appears in the local plan. It relates to a site-specific policy allocating Lakeside campus for B1 offices. It's the reason why this has been advertised as a departure to the local plan, and the reason why it's come before the committee today, even though there are no objections received on this scheme. This is the site layout. The banner on the top there describes the proposal. So it's a car dealership, which is a sui generis use, i.e. doesn't fall into any of the specified classes. A two-storey building, 5,432 square metres for showroom, workshops, MOT, valeting, etc. There are 3 entrances to the site via a cul-de-sac, the same cul-de-sac serving the Village Hotel and the Porsche Centre nearby. This first entrance is for customers, and these 2 here are described by the applicants as the sort of back of house access, serving the dealerships and the ability of a car transporter to enter and leave the site in a forward gear. The main sort of showroom elevation is here, albeit that the glazing sort of wraps around this part of the building, and then obviously that faces onto the car park of the Village Hotel. These are the ground floor layouts of showroom and workshops, and this is the upper floor to the proposed building. Some 3D images of the main showroom facing onto the east side of the building. This is an extract from the applicant's design and access statement, describing the term they use, the sort of back of house. It would mainly be viewed from within the Lakeside campus itself. I have the elevations for you. So at the top you have the east elevation. I described to you where the sort of main showroom glazing areas were. The bottom image is the south elevation that would face toward the A27, M27 embankment. The north elevation would mainly be sort of viewed from the access road into the Lakeside campus, and the image at the bottom, the west elevation, would mainly be viewed from 1000 building, actually within the Lakeside site. The issue that has given rise to delay in determination of this application is around nature conservation. This has now been resolved, as set out in your update sheets, which in short, the loss of the grassland sink, so the bit in yellow, is to be mitigated by the area cross-hatched in orange, and compensation for the loss of P138 by a financial contribution, as is described in the update sheets, will ensure no adverse effect on the integrity of the site in accordance with the Conservation and Habitats and Species Regulations 2017, and this is in line with advice from Natural England. Obviously, the other key issue was introduced by the Chair. It's the fact that the site is allocated for B1 offices. And as described in your report, there is a separate application, a non-material amendment, approved earlier this year that effectively substituted a component of the enabling uses on this site that was to a former private hospital, swapped with this part of the site. The two sites are sort of nearby. The private hospital was going to be in here, and now obviously the proposal is for a car dealership to the south. It was a similar amount of development, up to 7,000 square metres, and was again a development on that site was unlikely to add significantly to peak travel demands. For all the reasons that are set out in the report, it is no longer considered to conflict with the policy, and so you've got the recommendations before you that delegated powers are sought to grant conditional permission subject to completion of the planning obligations. The second recommendation is to add and amend conditions where necessary, and the third to refuse planning permission if those aren't secured by agreement within 3 months. the one other thing that I've forgotten that I wanted to mention particularly that's in your update sheets is the fact that there was a more minor issue around archaeology that wasn't resolved on that site. It is proposed now to be covered by a planning condition, but that isn't something that I've been able to draft and present to you today. But in any event, it's something that, because there's a requirement for local plan authorities to share any pre-commencement requirements with applicants and developers, it's something that when that has been completed, it will be put before the applicant's agents to deal appropriately with the archaeology issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. Questions? Councillor Pitt.
Could we go back to the image that you had up just now, the one when you finished, Alan?
Which one, sorry?
The one that you had up when you finished talking.
Oh, sorry.
That one. Just on that drawing, south of the development site, is that part of the lake which has got quite a lot of vegetation around it and is probably quite appealing for wildlife. In terms of the development site itself, is there anything condition-wise that means it has to be hoarded in such a way that it's not unnecessarily disruptive to wildlife in that area while the development itself is taking place?
It may be something that is in the habitat management plan. Certainly something that it wasn't particularly sort of specified by our ecologists, because usually the hoarding is often required from a sort of noise point of view, but it's something I'd be happy to sort of take back and if it was necessary, include as part of the construction management plan.
The reason I raised it is because there are no neighbours living nearby, and therefore there might not be an obvious need to mitigate against noise. The neighbours are the wildlife in that area, so putting up some hoardings that just mitigate against disruption to that while the development's taking place would then enable the new development to fit in with its surroundings better post-development, rather than seeing all the wildlife disappear from that part of the site.
Some months ago we approved the idea of a private hospital to the north of this site. What is the state of that application? Or is it being built? What is happening?
I mean, the permission dates back some years now on that site. The owners have concluded there is no reasonable prospect of that hospital proposal coming forward. I mean, the nexus for a private hotel on an office campus was fairly tenuous at the time, but what was explained by the applicants was that there was a regional demand on the M27 corridor for some sort of heart hospital, but for whatever reason they either found another site or reused another location, and there is no demand for a private hospital there.
So in effect the amount of land designated for offices will not have changed. It will have just changed from south of the access road to north of the access road. Would that be correct?
Absolutely correct.
Correct. Thank you.
In terms of anyone being consulted on this, who are the nearest residential neighbours?
There wouldn't have been any individual neighbourhood notifications because you are some way away in Wimmering from the site. But there will have been, in addition to the usual site notices, a press notice as a departure from the local plan.
Okay, that's helpful.
Looking at that, the nearest neighbour is the vicar of Wimmering. Stubbs.
Thank you, Chairman. If this city wants jobs and growth, it's going to have to show flexibility. Demand for large-scale office space has fallen very significantly, and it's not going to recover. It's permanent technological change. You just don't need huge floor spaces and lots of workers in order to manage a lot of business processes these days. So really our choice is to be pragmatic and show some flexibility and depart from the plan in order to secure a commercial use or see the site undeveloped. And this is a bit akin to the arguments I've had with many local residents about the student housing in the city centre, that the choice is not between student housing and private housing, or student housing and social housing, or student housing and retail. It's between student housing and nothing. That is the choice that we're actually facing. I think it's a good scheme. It's going to create work for a sizable number of people, bring in activity into this city. Happy to propose it.
Councillor.
Happy to second.
Any further comments from members? Right, those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is unanimous. You have, members, you have before you, for information only, a report on planning enforcement. Are there any questions that people need to ask about the generality of this? If not, can we accept the report? Thank you. We now need to, I think, go into... No, we don't need to go to private session to discuss dates. Well, we have the dates of the Planning Committee for the first half of 2019. 9th of January, 6th of February, 6th of March, 10th of April, and Thursday, the 23rd of May. Are those...
I give my apologies for that, Chair.
You give your apologies for Thursday, the 23rd of May. Can that be noted, please? I trust you will find a standing deputy.
Yes, I will.
Good. Apart from that, is it acceptable to everyone? Good. We then have some provisional dates. Wednesdays, 19th of June, 17th of July, 14th of August, 11th of September, 9th of October, 6th of November, and 4th of December 2019. Is there any reason anyone knows why we should not go ahead with those as being the provisional dates? Obviously, they may be revisited by the committee after the AGM. But we're happy with them. Well, that would conclude the afternoon's entertainment. Thank you very much for the consideration which you have thrown to a chairman who has coughed and spluttered his way through the meeting.
You weren't as butch as yesterday, though, Hugh.